Subscribe for more. I was sitting down and tried to be calm while grasping the edges of the chair with my hands. The air in the courtroom was so thick that it made everyone feel like they couldn't breathe. Bradley's words filled the room with a sense of self-satisfaction and confidence, as if he had already won. He told reporters, "I'll be taking half of your millions and your grandmother's estate." Every word he said echoed in the room, and the heaviness of his voice was hard to take. When he broke into a huge grin that filled his whole face, it was as if he was the one who announced the winning numbers in a lottery drawing. All I could feel was the burning in my chest and the anger I had been holding in for months. I did everything I could to be calm. At this point in time, they didn't have the power to show weakness. I knew precisely what was going to happen, and I wasn't going to allow him get away with what he did. Even though I was feeling a lot of things inside, I kept my voice calm when I said, "Judith Crawford is my name." At 45 years old, I have to admit that I never thought I would be sitting here in a divorce court in Nashville, Tennessee, watching my husband of 5 years try to take everything I've worked for, everything I've built over the course of my entire life. Bradley was sitting across the room in an expensive suit that was perfectly pressed. He seemed like a man who was determined to get all he wanted in life. When he slicked back his hair, which was a beautiful shade of gold, he looked like the interesting man who had stolen my breath away earlier. But when I saw him, I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. The same man who told me he loved me and promised me a bright future is now sitting there, plotting to take what is rightfully mine. The thin man with the sharp features said, as I was saying. He was Bradley's lawyer. "Because Bradley and Mrs. Crawford are married, my client is entitled to half of all their marital assets, including the large inheritance that Mrs. Crawford got while they were married." I felt my temper start to rise when I finally got what he was saying. Just the thought of him trying to seize my grandmother's money, which was properly hers and my hard-earned inheritance, made me sick to my stomach. This was a different case. He had always been greedy, but this was more than just being greedy. As the people in the courtroom who were watching the trial leaned forward and looked at Bradley and me, I kept an eye on both of us. Some of them might have been doing math in their brains. They were undoubtedly wondering how much Bradley would be able to take home. It was evident that they thought this would end with a financial settlement that was newsworthy. In some ways, it was. The reporters in the room were working hard, hurriedly taking down notes on their notepads. They were trying to make sure that they didn't miss anything. The group came here because of tales of a divorce case for millions of dollars that involved a well-known businesswoman from Nashville. They fully understood that they were seeing a big event. Something that people would probably buy. The lawyer was looking into Judge Richardson's eyes, and he seemed like he was going to be strict. She was in her 60s and had hair that was a steely gray tone. You couldn't tell what she was feeling just by looking at her face. She had been a judge for 20 years, so I could tell she had seen it all before. These kinds of situations were not new to her. It was clear by the way she went over the papers that this was the case. This time, though, I thought things would go differently. This instance was not like other cases at all. This is what I did with my life. Bradley was going to find out that I wouldn't give up without first doing my best to fight back. Bradley turned his chair a little toward me and smiled. It was the kind of smile he had when he thought he was in charge. That same smile, which had once made me feel like I was the only lady in the world and a very special person, now reminded me of everything he had taken from me. It seemed like a slap in the face now. His acts were so bold that they were beyond annoying. I could feel my fists tightening in my lap and my blood pressure rising. This was the same man who had once brought me coffee in bed and told me he loved me for who I was, not for how much money I had. All of that was now falling apart in front of me, though. It turned out that everything wasn't what it looked after the couple had been married for 5 years. I looked around the room where the court was meeting. The air was thick and heavy, and the mood was unpleasant. The dark wood paneling made the already gloomy room much worse. From where I was, I could hear the soft rustling of voices coming from the busy streets of Nashville. I remembered that even though my life was falling apart in front of a stranger, theirs was going on as usual. This was because people were going about their normal lives. I was totally aware of how ironic the situation was that was happening. I realized that there was an envelope in my purse, and I held on to it more tightly. The letter that would change everything. When Judge Richardson's voice broke into my thoughts, I turned around to face her and said, "Mrs. Crawford, do you have anything to say about these claims?" Even though my heart was racing, my thoughts were clear as I slowly got up. This is how things ended up. The moment I had been waiting for finally came. The exact moment that Bradley would finally have to deal with the consequences of his endless greed. The moment he realized that I was someone whose skills he had undervalued. "Your Honor," I started, keeping my voice calm and steady even though I was feeling a lot of anger within. "There is something I think the court should look into." As I walked to the front of the room, I had the strong feeling that everyone in the room was looking at me. I knew that they were paying attention to me. As soon as I pulled the manila envelope out of my backpack, everyone in the room turned to look at me. It seemed like everyone in the room stopped for a moment to catch their breath, and the sound of paper rustling broke the silence. Bradley looked away from the envelope, and his face showed that he wasn't sure what to do. He didn't grin anymore, and his body language changed. His shoulders were rigid. I could see the spark of doubt in that man's eyes. He had no idea what was going to happen. I gave Judge Richardson the envelope after she reached out her hand to get it. "Mrs. Crawford, what kind of document is this?" she questioned in a voice that was both calm and authoritative. I returned to my seat and kept a close eye on Bradley. In a matter of seconds, his countenance went from certain to confused to one that was almost horrified. I could see him quickly talking to his lawyer, Gerald Weston, and pointing in the direction of the judge's seat. It was clear that he was trying to figure out what was going on, but it was too late for him to do so. At that point, the harm had already been done. The envelope included the prenuptial agreement we had signed 5 years before that. Bradley believed it was just a normal thing. The one that would suddenly be the key to everything. The person who would show the world how dishonest he was and what he really wanted. Bradley's lawyer got up, and his face was completely white. It looked like someone had just hit him in the face. Gerald Weston remarked, "Your Honor, we didn't know about any prenuptial agreement." His voice shook as he spoke. "This is very strange." "Mr. Weston, sit down," Judge Richardson ordered as soon as he started to open the package. "I will look at the papers and decide if they are valid or not," he said. Seeing Bradley's face transform from confident to confused made me feel a flood of happiness. Judge Richardson went over the paper, and the only sound in the courtroom was the sound of paper being rustled. At that moment, I realized that Bradley was completely and utterly terrified. He couldn't do anything about the problem. The foundation of his plan was starting to fall apart. My lawyer, Patricia Holbrook, came down and said in my ear, "Just watch and wait and see what happens." My heart was still racing like a drum, but this time it was throbbing in a way that made me feel like I had won as I nodded my head in agreement. Finally, after months of getting ready for this moment, I had all the proof I needed to go on. Bradley was about to learn from his own mistakes that being greedy will always lead to having to deal with the repercussions. I could feel the tension in the room growing as Judge Richardson flipped through the pages of the prenuptial agreement. Bradley's rambling got crazier and crazier as each second that went by made him feel worse. Gerald Weston was unable to deal with the matter at all. Judge Richardson finally spoke to the court, taking it upon himself to do so. "This looks to be a prenuptial agreement that has been written up in the right way," she continued in a calm and firm voice. "It is dated 6 weeks before your marriage, witnessed by 2 notaries, and signed by both parties," she said. Bradley's lawyer looked deathly pale once he sat back down in his chair. He didn't have any more points to make. The prenuptial agreement could not be contested in any court of law since it was real. It is very clear that Bradley did not expect this to happen. He thought he would win this easily, just like his lawyer did. But now the truth was out, and there was no going back. Bradley's face changed into a look of shock because he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said, "I don't remember signing anything like this," and his voice cracked a little. He looked at me like he thought I would back down, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook. Not now and not ever in the future. When he yelled loudly, Judge Richardson raised an eyebrow to show that he was not impressed by the outburst. "Mr. Crawford, please stay seated and let your lawyer take care of these matters." Bradley, on the other hand, had made so much progress that there was no way to save him. People were starting to see through the carefully crafted character he had put up, and the weight of the situation was finally starting to sink in for him. He felt like the judge was in charge and not really there when she gave him a piercing look. "Mr. Crawford, did you look over the paper before you signed it?" Everyone in the room was paying attention to Bradley, and the silence was so loud that it was almost unpleasant. I could feel the fear rising inside of him as the question hung in the air without an answer. Bradley moved around in his chair awkwardly, glancing around the courtroom as if he were looking for a way out. He continued, I skimmed through it, in a voice that was barely audible over a whisper. But Judith said it was just a formality. The judge's look changed to one of seriousness. "Mr. Crawford, you signed a legal document without reading it after giving up your right to legal counsel. Now you're asking this court to throw it out because you didn't take it seriously?" Everyone stopped talking, and there was an unpleasant silence in the room. Bradley couldn't think of anything to say, and everyone in the group was watching and waiting for him to say anything. From that moment on, everything changed forever. The courtroom was so quiet that it seemed like the air had stopped moving and the whole room had gone completely dead, as if everyone there was holding their breath. There was no way out for Bradley, his world was being completely destroyed. Finally, the truth was coming out about the lies he had carefully crafted and how well he had portrayed the victim. As soon as I saw the dread in his eyes, I could tell how desperate he was. I could feel it in the air as the truth hung there. Magistrate Richardson didn't speak a single further word at first. Her look at Bradley was so cold and strong that it could have frozen fire. After that, all she did was keep staring. Before she spoke, she carefully thought about what she was going to say. "Mr. Crawford, did anyone make you sign this document? Were you under any kind of pressure or threat?" Bradley opened his mouth as if he were about to say something, but no words came out. His face also turned a very scary shade of red. The lies he told finally caught up with him and made him stop talking. He felt like the words were trapped in his throat. He quickly looked over at his lawyer, Gerald Weston, who was now sitting with his head in his hands. He made it very plain that he had lost. Bradley took a deep breath, and his voice shook as he turned to face the court and began to speak. "I thought it was just paperwork. Judith said it was a formality, so I didn't think it would matter." Judge Richardson leaned forward and said, "Mr. Crawford, you gave up your right to legal counsel and then signed a legal document without reading it. What's more, you are now asking this court to throw it out because you didn't take it seriously." Bradley put his head down to show how sad he was. He didn't know what to say when he had to answer. In this case, saying sorry is not enough. He couldn't say anything that would change the effects of the damage that had already been done. I could practically hear the gears moving in his head as he tried to think of a way to get as much as he could out of this predicament, but it was already too late. He couldn't stop it from happening because the whole truth had come out. I felt a peculiar sense of peace and tranquility come over me. Bradley was getting more and crazier all the time. In the months leading up to this moment, he had been feeling anxious, angry, and unsure of what would happen next. But now, with each passing second, he was coming apart. I was surprised that I felt a strange sort of happiness now that this moment had finally come, after waiting so long for it. I finally came to the idea that justice was being done. Bradley looked like he was a little uncomfortable and moved his chair around a few times. He whispered to himself, "This can't possibly be true," but even as his words hung in the air, it was clear that he didn't believe them. "I've given up everything for her. 5 years of marriage should mean something." There was a quiet murmur of reaction in the courtroom. Some people in the audience looked at Bradley with disdain, while others looked at him with pity. They had now seen the truth for themselves. The truth about a man who married for money and planned and plotted to get what he thought was rightly his. He acted like a loyal husband, but that was the only real part of the character. The real Bradley was a man who believed he could get everything he wanted without having to deal with the repercussions. Judge Richardson, her voice cut through the audience's whispers as she yelled, "Mr. Crawford. It looks like you're trying to take the moral high ground in this situation. But the law doesn't see things the way you do. This isn't a case of love or sacrifice, it's a case of financial fraud, and this court won't stand for that." The judge took a short interval so that her words could sink in. Bradley was having a hard time accepting what had happened to him, and the only thing that broke the heavy silence was his heavy breathing. After then, Judge Richardson asked me, "Mrs. Crawford, do you have anything else to say?" I slowly stood up, and the seriousness of the occasion hit me like a wave hitting the shore. I could finally breathe again after holding my breath for a long time. "Your Honor," I said with a steady voice but strong feelings, "I have spent the last 5 years of my life trying to build a future with Bradley. I trusted him. I loved him. But he didn't love me. He loved what I could give him. He saw me as a means to an end. And now, as he tries to take everything from me, I can see that his true nature has always been there, hidden beneath the surface." My gaze stayed steady and unyielding as I kept looking at Bradley. "I built my life on hard work, dedication, and the love of my grandmother, who left me everything. I'm not going to let him take that away from me." For a short time, I felt a rush of confidence before I even realized I had spoken. The words had come out of my mouth. It wasn't just about money or property, it was about sticking up for myself. It was about getting back my independence, my dignity, and the life I had worked so hard to construct for myself. Bradley jumped up from his seat in a fit of wrath, and in the process, he knocked his chair over onto the ground. "Judith, this isn't over," he exclaimed in a voice that was raspy with rage. "You can't just take everything away from me. I'm going to fight you for this. You can't just leave me with nothing." Judge Richardson stopped what he was saying right away when the gavel came down with a loud bang. "Mr. Crawford, I won't put up with outbursts in my courtroom. Sit down now, or I'll have you thrown out." Bradley was looking at me, and his chest was rising and falling swiftly as he inhaled. His eyes were full with rage and amazement, but there was also a feeling of dread. He had a deep-seated sense that he was about to lose this battle, and this made him very afraid. He tried to handle the situation in a way that would be good for him, but things didn't go as planned, and he couldn't escape the outcome that was going to happen anyway. Bradley sat back down, his cheeks blazing with fury, but it was clear that he had learned something new. He can't get out of paying for what he's done. Because of the unbreakable prenuptial agreement that had been made, my grandmother's inheritance was safe and sound. I owned that property absolutely and totally. Bradley said it was his, but that was only a desperate and phony attempt to seize something that wasn't his. The judge's focus turned back to the piece of paper in front of her. She said, "I have read the entire prenuptial agreement. It is clear that Mrs. Crawford's assets, including her inheritance, are protected under the terms of this agreement. There is no ambiguity in this document. Mr. Crawford is entitled to nothing from the marital estate, and his claims are hereby denied." I saw Bradley's face become pale as the words echoed around the courtroom. He was very sure of himself and thought he would get a lot of my grandmother's money just a few hours before this. He was a man who had become caught up in the complicated web of lies he had made for himself. Judge Richardson went on to say, "Also, Mr. Crawford will be responsible for any debts he made during the marriage. Mrs. Crawford will not be responsible for any of those debts." Bradley's mouth got dry. He had been living a life of luxury, which I had been paying for. I paid for the expensive car, the country club memberships, and the bad investments. Everything in his life had now reached a point of no return. Gerald Weston, Bradley's lawyer, spoke to the court in a voice that shook. "Your Honor," he began, "we would like to ask for a short break so that we can look over the papers more closely." His gaze was fixed on him, and Judge Richardson's face was cold and unfeeling. "Mr. Weston, didn't you look into possible prenuptial agreements before you filed your asset claims?" The probe was a harsh criticism, and it was clear to me that Gerald knew he had made a big mistake. He thought, like Bradley, that this would be an easy win. He was now learning the hard way that you can't just mess with people's lives and expect to get away with it. Bradley thought there was no way things would turn out well for him. There was no way for him to get out of the situation he was in. He couldn't get away from the situation he was in just now. After a while, the full weight of the situation finally hit home. Bradley, who used to be so sure of himself that he could stroll into any room and seem like he was in charge, suddenly shook with dread in front of the law. Because of this, the air in the courtroom got so thick that you could almost cut it with a knife. He looked like he was both angry and disbelieving, but there was something else going on behind his face as well. Fear that everything he had worked so hard for would be taken away from him and that he would be exposed as the person he really was, a guy who had used love as a cover to get what he wanted. Judge Richardson, she didn't take her eyes off of Bradley the whole time she spoke, and she spoke to him with a determination that was as frigid as ice. "Mr. Weston, you have 10 minutes to look over the document. But let me be clear, this is a legally binding agreement. It can't be changed, and it can't be interpreted. Any more delays or problems in this courtroom will not be tolerated." Bradley stayed in amazement and quiet when his lawyer read over the prenuptial agreement. Bradley's face showed a light tint of surprise. I could see that Gerald Weston was doing everything he could to find a way out of the dilemma he was in at the last possible moment, but he wouldn't discover anything like that. It was impossible for anyone to contest the agreement in any way since it was impregnable. Bradley had no way out of the situation he was in. His attempts to take charge of the situation and claim ownership of something that wasn't really his had failed spectacularly. As soon as the break started, I couldn't help but feel a little bit happy. This moment was the end of months of lying and feeling like I was losing control. The man who had been my buddy and my confidant just a short time before had suddenly become a man who was attempting to hold on to something that had never been his to begin with. At that moment, I knew that I was correct about this situation from a moral point of view. Bradley's rants just made things worse. After a while, the people who had been at the trial and had been doubtful about the outcome recognized him for who he really was. Someone who had used love and trust to obtain what he wanted. His eyes moved back and forth across the room, as if he were looking for some sign of kindness, but there was none to be found. People in the courtroom could see how greedy he was and how dishonest he really was. He had to deal with the results of his actions because he hadn't read the fine print. "Your Honor," Gerald Weston finally said, breaking the silence that followed, "we've looked over the papers, and while we agree that they are valid, we would like to make one last point about the money. Mr. Crawford thinks that when dividing assets, the emotional and financial contributions he made to the marriage should be taken into account, even though there was a prenuptial agreement." The comment was almost silly since it was so completely absurd. It was the last-ditch effort of a man who had nothing left in the world but his own self-respect. I thought to myself, emotional contributions? What does that mean? Is that what he's calling his lies, his manipulation, and his greed? Judge Richardson's face was almost blank when it came to showing emotion. "Mr. Weston," she said in response to that, "let me remind you that both parties signed the prenuptial agreement, and its terms are clear. Mr. Crawford's contributions, whether emotional or not, are not relevant in this case. The law is based on the facts, not on how people feel about a marriage." Bradley's face turned a bright red color because he was so angry. He ended by saying, "I gave up my whole career for this woman. I gave up everything. And this is how I'm repaid?" As his comments rang through the courtroom, the people watching were filled with suspense and anxiety. It was almost possible to touch how angry he was, and it was simple to see how desperate he was. At that point, though, I saw something other besides a man who had been caught lying. I met the man who had been playing a game for years that involves taking advantage of other people for his own gain, only to find out that his game had failed. It was time for him to deal with the effects of his choices. "Mr. Crawford," Judge Richardson said, cutting through his outburst, "you have no one to blame but yourself. You signed the prenuptial agreement. You chose to ignore its terms and think you could get away with taking what wasn't yours. You thought your marriage was a business deal, and now you will face the consequences of that belief." Bradley's outburst simply made his case weaker. Earlier, the people who were watching were interested in what was going on, but now they were watching with a mix of scorn and pity. He had become the living example of a cautionary tale, a man who had sought to get rich and ended up with nothing. Before Judge Richardson stopped and started talking, everyone knew how serious the issue was. Before we finish the ruling, Mrs. Crawford, is there anything else you want to say? She asked as she came over to me. I felt peaceful and my heart was still racing when I stood up again. I started by saying, Your Honor, I never wanted this. I never wanted to be in this position. I never wanted to be here, fighting for something that should never have been taken from me in the first place. But I will not let someone like Bradley take what is mine. I will not let his greed destroy everything I've worked for, everything my grandmother worked for. I felt like everyone in that room was gazing at me when I was there. Bradley was slumped over in his chair, looking despondent. His shoulders were drooping, and his upper body was bent over. He used to be a very self-assured man, but that is no longer the case. There was a man who had lost and fallen into his own trap. Your Honor, I said, my voice getting louder and louder, I am not here for revenge. I am here because I believe in justice. I believe in standing up for what is right. I have spent my whole life building something that means more to me than money. It's about family. It's about legacy. And I will not let anyone destroy that. Gerald Weston, Bradley's lawyer, looked at his client for a moment before turning his focus to the court. After that, no one had anything more to say. At that point, the legal action was over. She coughed before Judge Richardson spoke. The terms are clear based on the prenuptial agreement. Mrs. Crawford's assets, including her inheritance, are safe, and Mr. Crawford is not entitled to any of them. Also, Mr. Crawford will be responsible for any debts that come up during the marriage. Everyone was waiting patiently for the ultimate decision. There was a lot of excitement in the air, and the courtroom was quiet. Before she went back to her line of thought, Judge Richardson looked at each of the two people involved in the case one last time. This court grants Mrs. Crawford's request for a divorce. The division of assets is complete. Mr. Crawford, you are ordered to pay all debts that were made during the marriage. The court is now adjourned. The courtroom was full of whispers and murmurs as soon as the gavel hit the table. It has come to an end. I had won. Bradley was the one who won the fight. There was no way to go back beyond that point. I had a strange yet wonderful sensation of freedom. I could finally breathe easily for the first time in a few months. Finally, the terrible nightmare was over. The man had tried to kill me several times and had also tried to take everything from me. None of these approaches had worked. As I stood up and walked to the door, I couldn't help but look over at Bradley. He looked like he had lost, his face was pale and his body was slumped over, as if he had been beaten. He had lost everything, his money, his good name, and the life he had created on lies. For me, this wasn't just a win, it was the start of a new chapter in my life. I was taught that justice would be done, even if it took a long time. And when it eventually happens, every second of the fight will have been worth it. I was so busy with all that happened after the divorce that I don't remember much of what happened during that time. Bradley's life fell apart completely. The debts he had built up were like a heavy weight on him, and he went bankrupt in less than 6 months. He moved back in with his elderly parents and got a low-paying job to help pay his bills. He lost everything, including the lovely automobile, the country club memberships, and his business ventures. People in the town knew him as a selfish and dishonest person, and his reputation was ruined for good. Women who had once been head over heels in love with him now warned each other about the charming man who had tried to marry for money. I think I've done everything I've ever wanted to do since I was a kid but never had the chance to do until now. I utilized some of the money I got from my inheritance to start the Crawford Foundation. It helps women who are going through similar things, such people who need protection from financial predators like Bradley. I started the foundation because I wanted to help future generations. It is a way to make sure that other people don't have to deal with the same problems I did. In the end, I realized that my grandmother's advice about how to keep my family's money safe wasn't just about money. The most important things in life are trust, honesty, and love, and it is very important to protect them. I had finally found what I had been looking for, and this finding brought me peace of mind. When I left the courts that day, I knew that the battle wasn't just about money, it was about getting my life back on track. The fight that lay ahead would not be easy at all, but it would be about doing the right thing no matter how hard it was. Bradley may have lost everything, but I got something far more valuable in the end: my peace of mind, my dignity, and my future. The road wasn't easy, but it showed me that we can all get through the hard times in life. It isn't always the most important thing to win, what's more important is to fight for what you believe in, especially when it seems like you're up against an impossible obstacle. You should always remember this: no matter what, you should never let someone take something that belongs to you. Don't be scared to say what you think, stand up for what you believe in, and be strong. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button if you found this tale to be inspiring. If you do it this way, you'll never miss a moment of any of these amazing stories. Would you like to write a comment in the box below to share your thoughts? If that's the case, could you please tell us about the problems you've had in your own life and how you've coped with them? Thank you for watching this. Until we meet again, please keep standing up for what is right.